They call Nevada's Route 50 the loneliest road in America. You can drive for hours without seeing another set of headlights, a gas station, or a single sign of human life. But the terrifying truth about the deep desert isn't the isolation. It's the realization that when you are hundreds of miles from help, you aren't truly alone. We found out the hard way that out in the barren wastes, isolation is just an illusion. And out there, someone is always watching. The sun was bleeding out over the jagged peaks of the Toyabe Range, painting the sky in violent streaks of bruised purple and harsh, fiery orange. It was beautiful in a savage, unforgiving sort of way, but I couldn't appreciate it. My eyes were glued to the dashboard of our 2004 Fleetwood Bounder. The temperature needle was creeping dangerously close to the red line. Again. "How far to Ely?" Sarah asked. She was riding shotgun, her bare feet propped on the dash, though her posture was anything but relaxed. Her voice had that tight, frayed edge it always got when a road trip started turning into an ordeal. I tapped the GPS screen mounted to the windshield. The map was frozen, the little blue arrow suspended in a blank gray void. "Signal's gone," I muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from my temple. The RV's AC had given out 2 hours ago, and the cabin was a stifling greenhouse smelling of old upholstery, stale coffee, and the faint, acrid scent of burning coolant. But the last sign we passed said maybe 80 miles. If we keep it steady, we should make it before midnight. In the back, sitting at the dinette table, our 15-year-old son, Leo, let out a loud theatrical sigh, pulling off one of his noise-canceling headphones. "My phone's been dead for an hour. No bars, nothing. Why did we have to take the scenic route?" "Because it's a piece of American history, Leo," I snapped, harsher than I intended. The relentless heat and the hypnotic, endless ribbon of cracked asphalt were getting to me. We had been driving since dawn. Route 50 stretches across Nevada like a scar, cutting through dry lake beds, sagebrush valleys, and desolate mountain passes. For the last 3 hours, we hadn't seen a single car in either direction, just oceans of gray-green scrub and shimmering heat mirages. Then the Fleetwood gave a violent, metallic shudder. A sharp hiss erupted from beneath the doghouse engine cover between the front seats, followed by a thick plume of white steam billowing out from under the hood, smearing across the windshield. A chorus of red warning lights illuminated the dashboard like a Christmas tree. Damn it! I hit the hazard lights and wrestled the heavy steering wheel as the power steering immediately died. I guided the massive 30-foot beast off the asphalt, the tires crunching loudly onto the loose gravel shoulder. When I cut the ignition, the sudden silence was absolute, save for the furious bubbling of boiling coolant and the ticking of the overheated engine block. "Well," Sarah said softly, her hands gripping her armrests. "What now?" "I'll check it. Let it cool down," I said, though my stomach was dropping into a bottomless pit. I knew cars, but I wasn't a diesel mechanic. I stepped out into the twilight. The desert heat hit me like an open oven door, dry and suffocating. The silence out here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive. It felt less like the absence of sound and more like something actively pressing against my eardrums. There wasn't even a whisper of wind. The stillness felt entirely unnatural. I popped the hood and waved away the cloud of sweet-smelling steam. The radiator cap was vibrating. It was going to take hours to cool down enough to even look inside, let alone add our meager reserve of water. I walked around to the back of the RV to check the gas gauge manually. We were hovering just above a quarter tank. If we had to idle for AC or power later, we'd burn through it fast. "Mark," Sarah called from the open passenger window. She was pointing into the gathering gloom. "Look." About 50 yards off the highway, barely visible down a deeply rutted dirt path, stood a rusted metal signpost. The sign itself was pockmarked with what looked like buckshot, the faded paint illegible. Beyond it, sitting in a wide, flat depression surrounded by high ridges of eroded sandstone, was a clearing. It was an unofficial campsite. "We can't stay on the shoulder," I said. If a semi comes barreling through in the dark, they might not see us until it's too late. I'm going to coast it down there. We'll camp for the night, let the engine completely reset, and figure it out at first light." Sarah looked uneasy. "Are you sure? It looks abandoned." She wasn't wrong. I got back in, put the RV in neutral, and let gravity and a brief, agonizing crank of the starter motor roll us down the dirt track. We bumped and swayed, coming to a halt in the center of the Dust Bowl. As the dust settled and my eyes adjusted to the falling darkness, the headlights swept across the perimeter of the campsite. I felt a cold prickle of dread wash over the back of my neck. We weren't the first ones to pull in here. Scattered along the edges of the clearing, half swallowed by sagebrush and drifting sand, were 4 vehicles. A mid-90s sedan with shattered windows, a rusted-out pickup truck missing its tires, and furthest back, pushed up against the rock wall, the blackened, twisted skeleton of another RV. It had been completely gutted by fire. "Dad?" Leo's voice came from right behind my shoulder. He was standing in the aisle, staring out the windshield. "This place is creepy as hell." "They're just junkers," I said, trying to force confidence into my voice. "People abandon broken-down cars in the desert all the time. It costs too much to tow them. We're locking the doors, drawing the blinds, and getting some sleep. We'll be out of here by sunrise." By 10 p.m., the desert had plunged into a deep, freezing darkness. The temperature drop was staggering, forcing us to pull out heavy blankets. The silence outside remained absolute, unbroken by crickets or coyotes. Just a dead, suffocating void. I couldn't sleep. I sat at the dinette, a small battery-powered lantern illuminating a map I was pretending to read. Sarah was dozing in the back bedroom, and Leo was in the overcab bunk, tossing and turning. To break the maddening quiet, I reached over and flicked on the old CB radio mounted under the cabinets. It was a relic from the RV's previous owner, but occasionally you could pick up truckers passing on the highway. I spun the dial slowly. Static. Hiss. Static. I left it on channel 19, turning the volume down to a low hum. It was strangely comforting, a reminder of the outside world. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window, staring out into the pitch-black void. My eyes were heavy. I was just drifting off when the CB radio cracked to life. "Copy. Anybody out there?" The voice was warped by static, barely audible. I sat up straight, grabbing the mic. "Hello? This is a broken-down RV off Route 50. Do you copy? We need assistance." Silence. Just the low hiss of the airwaves. Then the voice returned. Clearer this time. Not a trucker's drawl. It sounded calm. Too calm. "I see you." My blood turned to ice water. I stared at the radio. "Who is this? Are you on the highway?" The radio clicked. "How many people are with you?" I swallowed hard, my thumb hovering over the transmission button. My mind raced. Was it a prank? Someone with a scanner driving by? Who am I speaking to? "Just the 3? Looks like 3. I slammed the power button off. The cabin plunged back into dead silence. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Dad?" I spun around. Leo was hanging over the edge of the upper bunk, clutching his blanket. His eyes were wide in the dim lantern light. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He shook his head. "No, but look." He pointed a trembling finger out the front windshield. I moved to the driver's seat and peered out. The desert was an ocean of ink, but far out in the distance, maybe a mile or 2 across the scrubland, I saw it. A light. Small, white, and bobbing up and down, like a flashlight. As I watched, a second light flicked on next to it, then a third. They were moving in a slow, deliberate line, parallel to the highway. "Are those hikers?" Leo asked, his voice cracking. "Nobody hikes out here in the dark," I said, pulling the front blinds shut with a harsh yank. "Get back to sleep, Leo. Don't open the windows." I didn't sleep a wink. I sat by the door with a heavy Maglite flashlight resting on my lap, listening to every creak and groan the RV made as it settled in the cooling night air. Morning finally broke, casting long, pale shadows across the campsite. The sky was an empty, merciless blue. I felt gritty, exhausted, and deeply on edge as I quietly unlocked the side door to check the engine. As I pushed the door open, I stopped dead. The door hadn't been fully latched. It swung open far too easily, a gap of perhaps half an inch between the frame and the rubber seal. I clearly remembered throwing the deadbolt. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped down onto the dusty ground. Surrounding the metal steps of our RV were footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They were distinct, heavy boot prints in the fine, powdery alkali dust. They came from the direction of the burned-out RV, circled our vehicle twice, and stopped directly in front of the door. The prints overlapped, shifting, as if someone had stood there for a very long time, just inches away from where I had been sitting in the dark. Mark? Sarah stepped out behind me, holding 2 mugs of instant coffee. She followed my gaze to the ground. The color instantly drained from her face. She dropped one of the mugs. It shattered, splashing brown liquid across the dust in the boot prints. "Get back inside," I commanded. I practically ran to the back of the rig and popped the fuel cap. I grabbed a dipstick and shoved it down. I pulled it out and stared at it in horror. The tank wasn't at a quarter. It was bone dry. The needle on the dash last night wasn't wrong. Someone had siphoned our gas while we slept. I stormed back into the RV and locked the door behind me. Sarah was pacing the narrow aisle, her arms wrapped around herself. "We need to leave. Right now," she said, her voice bordering on hysteria. "Someone was right outside our door, Mark. They took our gas." "We can't leave," I yelled, the panic finally breaking through my facade. "The engine is completely dry of coolant, and we have barely enough gas to make it back up the incline, let alone 80 miles to Ely. If we break down on the highway in the heat, we're dead." "We are dead if we stay here," she screamed back. "Look out the window. Look at those cars. Do you think people just walked away from them? They were trapped here, just like us." "Mom, stop it." Leo shouted from the dinette. He looked terrified. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate down. Okay, listen to me. I have 3 gallons of drinking water. I'll pour 2 into the radiator. There might be a gallon of gas left in the bottom of the tank, just below the siphon line. We wait until nightfall when it's cool so the engine doesn't blow immediately. We make a run for the highway. If we can just get cell service, we call 911. It was a terrible plan, but it was the only one we had. The desert sun climbed higher, baking the RV. By noon, the interior was 110 degrees. We sat in our underwear, sweating profusely, rationing our last gallon of water, waiting for the sun to go down, waiting for them to come back. The second night fell like a heavy velvet curtain. The temperature plummeted again, but the heat inside the RV lingered, trapping us in a suffocating, terrifying box. I had poured the water into the radiator as planned. Now we waited in total darkness. No lanterns, no CB radio. At 11:30 p.m., the noises began. It started as a soft, rhythmic crunching of gravel. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. Someone was walking slowly around the perimeter of the RV. Sarah grabbed my hand in the dark. Her grip was like a vice. Leo squeezed onto the couch next to us, trembling uncontrollably. The footsteps stopped near the back right tire. Then came a new sound. Clang. A sharp, metallic bang echoed from directly underneath the floorboards, right beneath our feet. We all jumped. Clang. Clang. They were hitting the undercarriage with something heavy. A pipe? A wrench? The sheer audacity of it, the psychological torture, was paralyzing. They weren't trying to break in quietly. They wanted us to know they were there. They wanted us to be terrified. "I'm going to start the engine," I whispered, my voice barely working. "Wait," Sarah breathed, her face pressed against the crack of the window blinds overlooking the burned RV. "Mark, look." I crept over and peered through the slit. Standing perfectly still in the shadow of the gutted, blackened RV was a figure. It was impossible to make out details in the starlight, but it was tall, unnaturally thin, and wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed hat. It was just standing there, facing our vehicle. Then, from the dark hills surrounding the campsite, a bright white light flashed. Flash, flash, flash. The figure by the burned RV raised a flashlight and signaled back. Flash, flash. "There's more than one," Leo whimpered. "Dad, they're signaling each other." Suddenly, a loud thud hit the side of the RV right next to the door. We all recoiled. "Hey," a voice yelled from outside. It was the same calm, flat voice from the radio. "Hey, Mark, come on out. We just want to help with your engine." My stomach performed a sickening flip. I never said my name on the radio. "Don't answer," Sarah mouthed, tears streaming down her face. Thud. Another heavy hit against the door. "We know there's 3 of you in there. It's getting awfully hot, isn't it? Just open the door." I grabbed a heavy tire iron I had brought inside earlier. "We are armed," I roared, my voice sounding desperate even to me. "I've called the police. They're on their way." A low, grating chuckle drifted through the thin walls. "No, you didn't. Service doesn't reach down into this bowl. Now open the door." In the chaos, I didn't realize Leo had moved. "Leo, get away from the door!" Sarah screamed. He had crept toward the front cab, thinking he heard something at the windshield. But he tripped over my boots in the dark, his hands slamming against the control panel by the steps. With a mechanical whine, the motorized exterior steps folded out, and the exterior porch light flicked on, bathing the dusty ground outside in a harsh yellow glow. "Turn it off!" I hissed. Leo panicked, mashing buttons. The deadbolt clicked. Before I could leap forward, the exterior door handle violently wrenched downward. The door flew open with a bang, slamming against the side of the RV. The desert night air rushed in. There was nobody standing on the steps. I rushed forward, grabbing the handle to slam it shut. But as I leaned out, I heard a scuffling sound from the front of the vehicle. Leo had leaned out the passenger window to see. "Hey!" he yelled. "Get away from there! Leo, no!" Before I could grab him, Leo opened the passenger door and stepped halfway out onto the running board. A hand, thick and coated in grease, reached out from the darkness beside the front tire and grabbed Leo by the ankle. Leo shrieked, kicking wildly. I dropped the tire iron, dove across the passenger seat, and grabbed my son by his shirt collar. I hauled backward with all the adrenaline-fueled strength I possessed. The unseen assailant let go, melting instantly back into the pitch-black shadows beneath the hood. I dragged Leo inside, slammed the heavy door, and locked it. I scrambled back to the main side door, ripped it shut, and threw the deadbolt, breathing in ragged gasps. "Buckle up!" I screamed. "We're leaving! Now!" I vaulted into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. I prayed to whatever God was listening as I turned it. The starter motor whined sluggishly. Come on, come on. Click, click, click. The battery was dying. I pumped the gas pedal once, twice. "Please," I roared, twisting the key with both hands. The engine caught. It sputtered, coughed, and roared to life, shaking the entire rig. The dashboard immediately lit up with warning lights like the temperature gauge already beginning its climb. I threw it into drive and slammed my foot on the accelerator. The heavy RV lurched forward. The rear tires spun wildly in the deep dust, fishtailing the back end. We clipped the rusted bumper of the abandoned mid-90s sedan. Metal shrieked against metal as I forced the steering wheel toward the dirt incline leading back to Route 50. As the headlights swept across the campsite one last time, the horrific truth clicked in my mind. The burned RV, the stripped sedan, the truck missing its tires. They hadn't broken down here by accident. This campsite was a trap, a spiderweb in the middle of nowhere. Someone disabled vehicles on the highway, maybe spikes, maybe tampering at the last gas station, and waited for them to coast down into the bowl. The abandoned cars belonged to the people who never left. The engine roared in protest as we hit the steep dirt incline. We were crawling, the transmission whining, slipping in the loose gravel. "Don't stop, Dad! Don't stop!" Leo was crying, strapped into the dinette seat. We crested the ridge and violently bounced onto the cracked asphalt of Route 50. I didn't bother checking for traffic. There wasn't any. I turned left, pointing us toward Ely, and kept my foot planted to the floor. The RV rumbled up to 40, then 50 miles an hour. The temperature gauge was pinned in the red. The engine smelled like burning metal and ozone, but I didn't care if the block melted into slag as long as it got us away from that campsite. 10 minutes passed. 20. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving me shaking violently. Sarah was quietly sobbing in the passenger seat. "We made it," she whispered. "We're away from them." I looked in the side view mirror. My blood froze in my veins. About a quarter mile behind us, cutting through the absolute darkness of the desert highway, were two headlights. They were high off the ground, the unmistakable stance of a lifted pickup truck. It was matching our speed perfectly. "Mark?" Sarah noticed my expression. She looked in her mirror. She let out a choked gasp. I pushed the gas pedal harder. The Fleetwood hit 65, shuddering violently, the steering column rattling in my hands. The headlights behind us sped up. The distance closed to 1/8 of a mile, then 100 yards. They were toying with us. They knew we were running on fumes and a dry radiator. They were just waiting for the RV's engine to finally seize and die on the dark, empty highway. We drove like that for an hour, the most terrifying hour of my life. A high-speed, agonizingly slow chase through the Nevada void. The black pickup never passed us. It never honked. It just sat right on our bumper, its brights blinding me in the mirrors. Finally, the impossible happened. A faint orange glow appeared on the horizon. Ely, the town limits, streetlights, gas stations, civilization. As we crossed the threshold of the first illuminated street lamp, the engine finally gave a catastrophic shuddering bang. A geyser of black smoke erupted from the hood, completely covering the windshield. The RV lost all power. I steered blindly, wrestling the dead weight of the vehicle into the bright, fluorescently lit parking lot of a 24-hour truck stop, slamming on the brakes. We skidded to a halt mere feet from the gas pumps. I ripped the door open and dragged Sarah and Leo out, screaming for help. A trucker filling his rig dropped his hose and ran toward us. The station attendant rushed out from behind the glass doors, dialing a phone. We were surrounded by light, by people, by safety. I turned around to look at the highway entrance. I expected to see the black pickup truck peeling out, retreating back into the darkness. But the road was empty. The truck was gone. We never got our RV back. The engine block was cracked in 3 places. The local sheriff took our statement, his expression unreadable, and promised to send a cruiser down Route 50 to check the campsite. They never found anyone. They told us the abandoned cars were just illegal dumping. They said the footprints were probably just scavengers. They treated us like panicked city folks who let the desert get to our heads. We flew home to Chicago 2 days later. It's been 6 months since that night. I still have nightmares about the heavy footsteps crunching in the gravel. But the real horror isn't the nightmares. It's what happened this morning. I was taking the trash out to the curb in front of our house in the quiet, safe suburbs. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. I looked up. Parked at the end of our cul-de-sac, 50 feet away, sitting idle with its engine rumbling softly, was a lifted, matte black pickup truck. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. As I dropped the trash bag, a burner phone resting on my front porch rail suddenly buzzed with a text message. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was from an unknown number. Just one line. "We know there's 3 of you in there." I spent 6 nights at a lakeside campground during one of the worst storms I'd ever driven through. Every night at exactly 2:13 in the morning, I woke up. Not around 2:13, not approximately, exactly 2:13. And every single time there was a woman standing outside the RV parked at Site 12. She never moved. She never spoke. She never left. At first I thought she was another camper. By the 4th night, I wasn't sure the RV at Site 12 had anyone living in it at all. And after I finally fled the campground, I discovered something on my phone footage that still keeps me awake years later. The woman had been standing behind my RV long before I ever noticed her. The rain started somewhere outside Spokane and never really stopped. By the time I reached the campground, I had spent nearly 8 hours driving through sheets of gray water that blurred the highway into a tunnel of headlights and spray. I travel alone most of the time. I've spent years moving between state parks, lakeside campgrounds, and public land in a 30-foot travel trailer. Most nights blur together. But I remember that week perfectly, because of what happened at Site 12. The campground sat beside a large mountain lake tucked deep inside a forest valley. Normally it was popular during summer, but the storm had arrived 3 days earlier and apparently chased most people away. When I pulled through the entrance, muddy water flowed across the gravel road like shallow streams. The office building was dark, except for one window. A hand-painted sign read, "I parked and ran through the rain." The camp host was an older man named Walter. He looked exhausted, not physically exhausted, more like someone who hadn't slept well in a long time. He checked me in while thunder rolled somewhere over the lake. "Are you sure you want to stay?" he asked. I laughed. "I've already driven 600 miles. Walter stared out the window. "The storm's supposed to sit here all week. I can handle rain." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Most people couldn't. He handed me a map. Red X's covered most of the campground. Empty sites, canceled reservations, early departures. Only a few campers left. That's fine by me. He looked like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he tapped the map. "You're at Site 11. I glanced down. The site beside mine was marked Site 12, already occupied. "Neighbor?" I asked. Walter's eyes shifted briefly. "Yeah." Then he changed the subject. 5 minutes later, I was driving deeper into the campground. The place felt abandoned. Rain hammered the windshield. Branches swayed violently overhead. Most campsites sat empty. Picnic tables stood partially submerged in puddles. Fire rings overflowed with water. Everything looked deserted. Then I found Site 11 and Site 12. My site sat beneath a cluster of tall pines overlooking the lake. The neighboring RV occupied Site 12, only 40 yards away. It was an older fifth-wheel trailer, white, weathered, streaked with dirt. Its interior lights glowed warmly through drawn curtains. At first glance, it seemed completely normal, yet something immediately felt strange. No vehicle, no chairs, no awning, no footprints, no movement, just lights. I remember staring through my windshield while rain drummed overhead. The trailer looked occupied, but it didn't look lived in. I parked anyway. By nightfall, the storm intensified. Wind shook my RV. Rain rattled against the roof like handfuls of gravel. I cooked dinner and watched downloaded movies. Around midnight, I noticed the neighboring trailer's lights were still on. Every single light, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, all glowing through the curtains. I found it odd but not alarming. Some people leave lights on. Maybe they were awake, maybe they had insomnia. I eventually went to bed. Sometime during the night, I woke briefly. No reason, just one of those random awakenings. I rolled over, checked my phone, 2:13 a.m. The storm continued outside. For a moment, I simply listened. Then I looked through the small side window beside my bed. Site 12 was visible through rain-streaked glass. The trailer lights still burned, and there was someone standing outside. A woman, motionless, facing the trailer. Her back toward me, dark hair hanging straight down, no umbrella, no rain jacket, just standing there. The sight surprised me enough to sit up, but before I could focus, lightning flashed. The campground exploded with white light. When darkness returned, she was gone. I convinced myself she had simply walked away. Then I fell back asleep. The next morning, I barely thought about it. The storm continued. Heavy rain, low clouds, cold wind. The lake had disappeared behind gray mist. I spent most of the day inside editing photos and reading. Occasionally, I glanced toward Site 12. The trailer never changed. Lights on, curtains closed, no movement, no people, no vehicle, nothing. Every instinct screamed that I should not leave my RV, should not approach, should not acknowledge her. I kept recording. At 2:17, footsteps sounded outside, directly beside my RV. Crunch, 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 slow, measured, circling. The woman remained visible across the campsite, yet footsteps continued around me, as though someone else was walking nearby. I locked every door, closed every blind, and waited for dawn. The next day, I finally decided to investigate. The weather briefly eased, not sunshine, just lighter rain. I walked directly to Site 12. For several seconds, I stood outside the trailer, my pulse hammered. The place looked abandoned, no tire tracks, no fresh footprints, mud covered everything. A smell drifted from somewhere nearby, rotting food. I climbed the steps, knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open. The smell hit immediately. Rot. Mold, stale air. The interior was empty, completely empty. No occupants, no luggage, no recent activity. Dust-coated countertops. Food sat decaying inside the kitchen sink. A carton of milk had collapsed into a swollen, leaking mess. Fruit had liquefied inside a bowl. Everything suggested abandonment. Weeks, maybe months. Certainly not days. Yet the lights worked. Every light remained on. I walked slowly through the trailer, bedroom, bathroom, living area. Nothing. No sign anyone had stayed there recently. The silence felt oppressive. Then I noticed the calendar. Still hanging on the wall, months out of date, untouched. I left immediately. Back outside, rain began falling harder. I headed straight toward the maintenance shed. A younger campground employee stood loading supplies into a cart. I asked him about Site 12. His reaction was immediate. His shoulders stiffened. What about it? Nobody's living there. He looked toward the lake, avoiding eye contact. It's not supposed to be occupied. Then why is it listed as occupied? No answer. I pressed harder. I've been seeing a woman over there. His face lost color, only slightly, but enough. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, you should probably leave before the roads flood. What? You should leave. Who is she? His eyes darted toward Site 12, then back to me. I don't know. The answer sounded rehearsed, like something repeated many times. I never got another word from him. He climbed into a utility vehicle and drove away. That night the storm became violent. Thunder shook the valley. Wind screamed through the trees. The campground felt completely cut off from the world. I considered leaving. Instead, I stayed. Partly because I wanted answers. Partly because I no longer trusted my own perceptions. I needed proof. Real proof. Not assumptions. Not exhaustion. Not fear. I set up my phone to record continuously through the night. Then I waited. 2:13 a.m. arrived. The floodlight flickered. The woman appeared. Only this time she wasn't at Site 12. She stood beside my RV. 3 feet from my window. I froze. Every muscle locked. Her face remained hidden beneath wet strands of hair, but she was close enough now that I could see details. Pale skin, water dripping from her clothing, arms hanging motionless. She stood facing my RV. Not Site 12. Me. The floodlight buzzed overhead, then died. Darkness swallowed the campground. Every light vanished simultaneously, not just mine, everything. The entire campground lost power. For several seconds only rain existed. Then the knocking began. Boom. The RV shook. Boom. Boom. The sound echoed through the storm. Violent. Deliberate, like someone striking the side of the trailer with both hands. I stumbled backward. The knocking moved. Front wall, rear wall, side wall. Each impact powerful enough to rattle cabinets. Racing, waiting, watching. The woman appeared exactly on schedule. Floodlight flickering, motionless, silent. This time she seemed closer. Not actually closer, just somehow clearer. I could make out details. Long dark hair, thin frame, arms hanging unnaturally straight, face hidden. The sight filled me with overwhelming dread, the kind that bypasses logic. Nothing else. The storm drowned every other sound. Yet beneath the rain I heard footsteps, running around the RV, circling, faster, faster, faster. The walls trembled, something struck the door, once, twice, again. I started the truck, the engine roared alive, headlights illuminated sheets of rain. For one brief second I saw her, standing directly in front of the vehicle, motionless, watching. Then lightning flashed, and she was gone. I didn't wait. I drove. Mud sprayed behind me. Branches whipped across the windshield. The campground disappeared into darkness. I never looked back. The road out had partially flooded. Twice I nearly slid into ditches, but eventually I reached the highway. Only then did I stop. Only then did I breathe. I spent the rest of the night parked beneath a gas station canopy 40 miles away. Morning brought sunlight for the first time all week. The storm had finally moved east. Everything felt normal again. Ridiculously normal. By noon, I had nearly convinced myself that exhaustion explained everything. Sleep deprivation, isolation, stress, the empty trailer, the woman, the footsteps, all of it. Then I reviewed my recordings. Most were useless. Darkness, rain, poor audio, nothing remarkable. Until I opened footage from the third night, the night I first recorded Site 12. I watched carefully. The woman appeared at 2:13 as expected, motionless, standing beside the neighboring trailer but something else caught my attention. A shape near the edge of the frame, barely visible. Behind my RV, I rewound, paused, enhanced brightness. My stomach dropped. There was a person standing behind my trailer, a woman, motionless, watching. Timestamp 11:41 p.m. Hours before I first woke at 2:13, I checked another recording. Same thing, 12:26 a.m. Still there. Another, 1:03 a.m., still there, standing behind my RV, completely motionless, watching. Every recording showed the same figure. Never moving, never approaching, simply standing there in darkness. The worst part came when I opened the final recording, the one from my last night, the one before I fled. The camera had continued running after I escaped for nearly 20 minutes. Rain battered the lens, power remained out, nothing happened. Then, at 2:34 a.m., the floodlights suddenly flickered back to life. The camera captured Site 12 clearly. The trailer stood empty. No woman, no movement, nothing. Then the camera shifted slightly in the wind, just enough to reveal the rear corner of my RV. And there she was, standing exactly where she'd been hours earlier, behind the trailer, motionless, watching. The timestamp read 2:34. 21 minutes after I'd first seen her beside my window, which meant either she had somehow moved back there without ever appearing on camera, or she had never left that spot at all. I closed the video, packed my equipment, and deleted nothing. Years later, the files still exist. I still have every recording, every timestamp, every note, every photograph. I occasionally watch them when I convince myself the memories have become exaggerated. The footage always proves otherwise, because no matter which video I open, no matter which night I examine, eventually I notice the same thing. Not the woman standing at Site 12, not the flickering floodlight, not even the impossible timestamps. It's where she's looking. Every frame, every recording, every night. She isn't facing Site 12, she isn't facing the lake, she isn't facing the road, she's looking directly at my RV. And in the earliest footage, recorded before I ever knew she existed, she's already standing there in the darkness, waiting for me to notice. The rain came down like it wanted me dead. I was somewhere between nowhere and the next state line, 2:47 a.m., doing 68 in a 70 zone because the wipers couldn't keep up. The interstates stretched out like an artery, bleeding black water under my headlights. My name is Marcus Hale, 43, divorced, full-time RVer since the company laid off half the warehouse in Tulsa. Tonight I was just trying to stay awake long enough to reach the next truck stop before my eyes gave out. The CB crackled to life. Most nights it's the usual trucker poetry, lot lizards, bad coffee, wives who don't understand. But tonight felt different. The static had weight. Then came the first warning. I'd pulled into the Big Rig Haven off I-40 just after midnight for diesel and caffeine that tasted like it had been filtered through engine grease. The place smelled of wet asphalt, fryer oil, and that specific loneliness only highway people know. The old woman working the counter had a face like cracked leather and eyes that had seen every kind of fool. Her name tag read Doris. "You heading east?" she asked while ringing me up. "Yeah. All the way to Knoxville if the rain lets up." She slid my change across the counter but didn't let go right away. "Then do yourself a favor, honey. Stay off Channel 6. I laughed, polite-like. "What's wrong with Channel 6? "Nothing's wrong with it," she said, voice dropping. "That's the problem. Nobody's used Channel 6 in 15 years. Not since the wreck outside Joplin. Truckers say the channel belongs to the road now. You use it. The road uses you back." I thanked her, paid for my coffee and 2 sleeves of caffeine pills, and walked back out into the storm. 10 miles later, I flipped the CB on anyway. Most channels were alive with the usual chatter. Channel 19 was a circus of complaints about speed traps. I spun the dial looking for something calmer. Channel 6 was dead quiet. Perfect. I keyed the mic. "This is Lone Rider in the white Fleetwood, eastbound on 40. Anyone out there fighting this rain with me?" Static. Then a voice came through. Thin, female, young. "Help me, please. Please, my car broke down. I'm on the shoulder. Mile marker 187. It's so dark." I sat up straighter. The voice sounded genuinely scared. "Copy that," I said. "Mile marker 187. I'm coming up on 192 right now. You got hazards on?" No answer. Just the hiss of rain on the roof and the low growl of my diesel. I passed mile marker 187 30 seconds later. No car, no hazards. Nothing but guardrail and black trees whipping in the wind. Weird, but not impossible. Maybe she got a tow. I kept driving. An hour later, the voice came back. "White Fleetwood, I see you." My stomach tightened. I hadn't given my rig color on this channel. I keyed up. "Who is this?" "You're doing 69, left lane. You just passed the green mile marker sign with the bullet holes in it." I looked up. The bullet hole sign slid past my window exactly as described. The hair on my arm stood up. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded. A different voice cut in, male this time, older, calm in a way that felt worse than panic. "Marcus Hale. You should have listened to Doris." They knew my name. I hadn't said my name on the radio. Not once. Static exploded like tearing metal. When it cleared, the woman's voice was back, but closer now, whispering. "They're behind you, Marcus. The black one, been following since the state line." I checked my mirrors. Nothing but rain and distant taillights. Then, far back, maybe half a mile, 2 low headlights. A black SUV. Tinted windows. No front plate visible. I sped up. It matched my speed. For the next 40 minutes, the transmissions grew worse. A trucker named Big Bear came on Channel 19 warning everyone to switch off 6. Then he switched to 6 himself to tell me to pull over at the next exit and wait for help. His voice cut off mid-sentence with a scream that didn't sound human. After that, several regular truckers I'd been chatting with on 19 simply stopped responding. Their handles went dark one by one. Meanwhile, my GPS set for Knoxville kept trying to reroute me onto service roads and old county highways I'd never heard of. Every time I ignored it, the screen flashed recalculating and tried again. The black SUV stayed exactly 3 football fields back. Never closer, never farther. At 4:12 a.m., I pulled into another truck stop, this one called Rusty's Crossroads. I needed to piss and maybe talk to a real person. The lot was strangely empty for that time of night. Only 4 rigs parked, all dark, no one moving around. I went inside. The clerk was young, maybe 22, headphones in. When I asked about Channel 6, he laughed nervously. "Man, you're the 3rd person tonight asking about that." I don't know shit about CBs, but the security cameras have been glitching for the last hour, showing old footage or something. Weird as hell. I looked up at the monitor behind the counter. The timestamp read 2 hours ago. On screen, my own RV was clearly visible pulling into the lot. I had arrived 4 minutes ago. I didn't stay long. Back on the highway, the radio had become something alive. It started playing my own conversations back to me. My voice from earlier that night, slightly distorted. "Just trying to stay awake, divorced. Company laid me off." Then the other voice, the calm man. "Poor Marcus. All alone out here, no one looking for you for days." I tried switching channels. Every single one bled into 6 like the frequency was infected. The black SUV was closer now. Sometimes I'd lose it in the rain, only for it to reappear suddenly in my side mirror. No headlights, just the faint reflection of my own taillights on its wet black paint. At one particularly bad stretch near the Tennessee border, the highway split. My GPS screamed at me to take the right fork toward an old way station that had been closed for years. I fought it and stayed left. The radio immediately responded. "Marcus, you shouldn't have done that. They don't like it when you fight." Then came my own voice again, but this time it sounded like I was crying. "Please, I just want to go home." I had never said those words. The exits started looking wrong. Billboards advertising hotels that went out of business in the 90s, gas stations with faded logos of companies that no longer existed. The rain never let up. It felt less like weather and more like the sky itself was trying to wash me off the road. I stopped at one last truck stop at 5:40 a.m., desperate for other people. The pumps were on, the lights were on, but every security camera had its lens smashed. Inside, the coffee pots were full and hot. Fresh donuts sat under the glass. No employees, no customers. Just a radio behind the counter playing Channel 6 at low volume. My name came through it again. Marcus Hale, mile marker 312, White Fleetwood. We're waiting for you. I ran back to the RV, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice in the rain. I shouldn't have kept driving, but stopping felt worse. The black SUV was right behind me now. No pretense. Its high beam suddenly flooded my mirrors, blinding me. Then the way station appeared. It wasn't on any map I'd seen. An old, abandoned scale house from the 70s, concrete cracked, weeds growing through the pavement. Red and blue lights flashed from police cars parked at strange angles, but something was wrong with them. The lights rotated too slowly. The cars looked old, like 1990s Crown Vics. My engine started coughing. The fuel gauge dropped from half a tank to empty in seconds. I coasted into the way station lot as the rain reached biblical levels. The radio screamed, "Get out of the RV, Marcus. They're almost here." It was my own voice, but layered with dozens of others. Men, women, children, all terrified. I grabbed my go bag, the .38 I kept under the seat, and ran for the empty scale house. The door was unlocked. Inside smelled of mildew and old blood. Through the broken window, I watched the black SUV glide to a stop 50 yards away. Its doors opened. Figures stepped out. Too tall, wrong proportions. Rain poured over them, but they didn't seem to get wet. I raised the revolver. The radio in my RV, 50 feet away now, kept transmitting. My voice. Begging. "Please, I didn't know. I'll never use Channel 6 again. Just let me go." One of the figures turned its head toward the scale house. It didn't have eyes, just deeper darkness where eyes should be. I ran out the back. There was an old service road behind the station. Overgrown, my boots sank into mud up to the ankles. I ran until my lungs burned and the rain tasted like copper in my mouth. Behind me I heard engines, multiple now. I reached an old chain-link fence, climbed it, ripped my shirt, kept running into the tree line. The road behind me was closing, not metaphorically. The asphalt itself seemed to be folding, like reality was being rolled up. I stumbled onto another interstate somehow, different number, different state maybe. A semi roared past, and I flagged it desperately. The driver slowed. Older guy, kind face. He opened the passenger door. "You okay, buddy?" I climbed in, sobbing. He looked at me carefully. "What channel you been listening to, son?" I couldn't answer. He reached over and turned on his CB. It was already on Channel 6. Static. Then a new voice. Calm. Male. "Got another one, boys. White male, mid-40s, scared, heading your way." The trucker looked at me with genuine pity. Should have listened to Doris. I'm writing this from a motel room I don't remember checking into. The clock says 3:17 a.m., but the sun is coming up outside. The TV is on. Every channel is static except one, Channel 6. My own voice is coming through the television now, recorded tonight, begging future drivers. If you're listening to this, please stay off Channel 6. No one uses it anymore. No one is supposed to use it. The road remembers. The road always remembers. I can hear an engine idling outside my motel door. It sounds like a black SUV. And somewhere far away on a rain-slicked interstate, another exhausted driver is probably flipping through channels right now, looking for something calm. They'll find Channel 6. They always do. The first time the generator started by itself, I thought I was dreaming. The second time, I knew I wasn't. The third time, I looked through the frost-covered window and saw footprints circling my RV. Fresh footprints, in the middle of a blizzard. And by then, I had already realized something much worse. The tracks weren't leading away. They were leading underneath. I was crossing the mountains alone when the storm hit. Not a normal winter storm. One of those massive systems that seem to swallow entire states. The forecast had warned about heavy snow, but every local I spoke to at gas stations shrugged it off. just another mountain storm. The problem was that nobody expected it to arrive 6 hours early. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky had become a solid sheet of gray. By 5, visibility had dropped below a quarter mile. At 6, snow was blowing sideways across the highway. I was driving a 26-foot Class C motorhome through the mountains of western Montana. Not huge, not tiny. Large enough to live comfortably, large enough to become a coffin if the weather turned bad. The state police road closure signs appeared around dusk. Flash flood barriers had been replaced with emergency snow gates. Traffic crawled, then stopped. An officer moved vehicle to vehicle. When he reached my window, snow was already collecting on his shoulders. Roads closed. For how long? Morning, maybe. Maybe? He shrugged. Depends on the storm. I asked about nearby campgrounds. He pointed farther up the mountain. There used to be a Forest Service campground about 8 miles ahead. Not sure if anyone's there. Open? Another shrug. Better than sitting on the shoulder. That became my entire plan. 8 miles later, I found the campground. The entrance sign was nearly buried. Snow covered half the lettering. The access road wound through dense pine forest. No lights, no ranger station, no vehicles, nothing. My headlights illuminated rows of empty campsites disappearing into darkness. Snowflakes drifted through the beams like white insects. The place felt abandoned. I drove slowly through the loops. Every site sat empty beneath thick blankets of snow until I reached the far side. A trailer stood near the tree line. Old, white, unlit. It sat maybe 200 yards away, far enough that details disappeared into darkness. Close enough that I noticed it. I considered parking elsewhere. Instead, I chose Site 14, mainly because it had a relatively level pad. The trailer remained visible through gaps in the trees. A silent shape watching from the darkness. By then, the storm had intensified dramatically. Wind screamed through the pines. Snow hammered the RV. The entire vehicle rocked slightly. My phone displayed no service, no bars, no emergency signal, nothing. I checked weather radio frequencies, mostly static. Then even the static faded beneath bursts of interference. The campground felt cut off from the world, as if the storm had erased everything beyond the trees. I started the onboard generator. The familiar rumble settled my nerves. Heat flowed through the vents, lights brightened. The small comforts of electricity transformed the RV from a metal box into a home. For about 20 minutes. Then the generator sputtered, coughed, died. Silence rushed in. Only wind remained. I tried restarting it. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The starter clicked uselessly. The cold seemed to grow stronger immediately. I sat behind the wheel listening to the storm. The darkness outside pressed against every window. Far away beyond the trees, the unlit trailer remained motionless. I told myself I would sleep a few hours. Road crews would clear the highway. Morning would come. Everything would be fine. At the time, I still believed the worst thing in that campground was the weather. The first generator startup happened at exactly 2:17 a.m. I know because the sudden roar jolted me awake. The sound exploded through the RV. I sat upright instantly, heart racing. For several seconds, I couldn't understand what I was hearing. Then realization hit. The generator. It was running. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the control panel. The generator indicator showed active, running normally, producing power. Heat vents had already begun blowing warm air. The problem was simple. I hadn't started it. I had tried repeatedly earlier. It wouldn't even turn over. Now it was running perfectly. I shut it off. The silence felt enormous afterward. I inspected every switch, every setting. Nothing seemed unusual. Eventually, exhaustion won. I returned to bed. The storm continued outside. Wind, snow, the occasional groan of trees bending, then sleep. The generator started again at 3:51. This time I almost fell from the bed. The engine roared to life without warning. I shut it down again. My hands trembled. Maybe a wiring fault, maybe temperature fluctuations, maybe something triggering the automatic start system. Except I didn't have an automatic start system installed. The generator physically could not activate itself, not without someone pressing the switch. I spent 20 minutes checking every panel. Nothing. No explanation. Finally, I crawled back beneath the blankets. The RV felt colder than before. Not physically, psychologically. The way a familiar room feels different once something impossible happens inside it. Morning never truly arrived. The sky remained dark gray. Snow still fell. Roads remained closed according to emergency radio broadcasts. The storm had worsened overnight. I stepped outside. The cold hit like a punch. My breath crystallized instantly. The campground looked completely transformed. Everything was buried. Several feet of fresh snow covered the ground. That's when I noticed the footprints. They surrounded the RV. A complete circle, human footprints, boot prints, fresh. I stared at them for several seconds. The storm had continued all night. Heavy snowfall, strong wind. Yet the tracks remained clearly visible. Someone had walked around my RV more than once. The path circled the vehicle repeatedly, then vanished into drifting snow. No approach route, no departure route, just circles, as if whoever made them had appeared beside the RV and disappeared the same way. I spent half an hour searching. Nothing. The distant trailer remained visible through the snowfall. Still dark, still silent. No smoke, no lights, no signs of life. That afternoon, I discovered food missing. At first, I thought I had miscounted: a package of jerky, 2 protein bars, a can of soup. Small things. Yet I lived alone. No animals could access the interior. I checked every cabinet, every storage compartment. Nothing else appeared disturbed. Just enough missing to make me doubt my memory. The kind of uncertainty that grows roots in your mind. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I ate them. Maybe. That night, the scraping began. A slow metallic sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Above me, on the roof, I froze. The noise continued, moving from front to back, then stopping, then starting again. Snow sliding, I thought. Branches. Ice. The explanation sounded reasonable until I listened carefully. The rhythm was wrong, too deliberate, too controlled, as if something was being dragged. I turned off every interior light. The RV plunged into darkness. The scraping stopped immediately. Silence, then thunk. A heavy impact overhead, followed by another, then nothing. I barely slept. Around midnight, I heard a new sound, a metallic rattle. Close. Very close. Outside the bedroom wall. I grabbed the flashlight and peered through the window. Darkness, blowing snow, nothing visible. Then the sound came again. Clank, clank, clank. Recognition arrived instantly. One of the exterior storage compartments. Someone was trying to open it. The latch rattled repeatedly. Testing, pulling, checking. I remained frozen beside the window. The flashlight felt slippery in my hand. The rattling continued for nearly a minute, then stopped. No footsteps, no voices, nothing, only the storm, as if whatever stood outside had dissolved back into the snow. The power failed shortly after midnight the following evening. Not just the generator, everything. The batteries dropped unexpectedly, voltage collapsed, interior lights dimmed, then died. The heater stopped. Silence filled the RV, a dangerous silence. Temperature drops fast inside a winter RV, faster than most people realize. Within an hour, my breath became visible. Frost formed along window edges. I layered clothing beneath blankets, still shivered. The cold seemed alive, crawling slowly inward, taking territory, 1 inch at a time. Outside, the storm continued its assault. Wind battered the vehicle, snow hissed against glass. The RV creaked constantly, 1,000 tiny noises. Any one of them could conceal something worse. At approximately 1:30 a.m., the motion light activated. A bright white beam erupted outside. I sat upright instantly. The light illuminated part of the tree line. Snow swirled through the air. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then I noticed movement, a figure, standing between 2 pines, motionless, watching. The distance made details impossible. Human height, dark clothing, no visible face. The figure remained perfectly still, not sheltering from wind, not walking, simply standing, watching the RV. The light switched off, darkness swallowed everything. I rushed to another window. Nothing. The figure had vanished. 5 minutes later, another light appeared. Not mine. The trailer. The distant trailer. A yellow glow illuminated one of its windows. I nearly laughed from relief. Someone lived there. Of course. A camper. A hunter. A caretaker. Anything. Finally, there was a logical explanation. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The wind almost knocked me sideways. Snow blasted across the campground. I waved toward the trailer. No response. The light remained steady, warm, inviting, human. I considered walking over, then noticed something beside my RV. Tracks. Fresh tracks, leading beneath the vehicle. Not around it, not past it, under it. My stomach dropped. I knelt carefully, pointed the flashlight downward. The beam revealed packed snow, shadow, mechanical components, nothing else. Yet the footprints continued underneath, as though someone had crawled there. The space wasn't large. A person could fit, barely. The realization made my skin crawl. I backed away immediately. The trailer light went dark, instantly, without warning, as if someone had flipped a switch the moment I noticed the tracks. The banging started 30 minutes later. One impact, hard enough to shake the entire RV. Boom. I nearly screamed. Another hit followed. Boom, boom. The sidewall vibrated. Cabinets rattled. Something or someone was striking the vehicle. The attacks moved. Front panel, rear quarter, driver's side, then passenger side. Always one impact at a time. Never fast, never frantic. Almost methodical, like someone testing the structure, learning it, mapping it. The storm masked everything. No voices, no footsteps, only sudden explosive impacts, each one arriving from a different direction. The banging continued for over 20 minutes, then stopped, completely. The silence afterward felt worse, because now I knew someone was out there. Not an animal, not the weather, someone. And they were choosing not to come inside, not yet. By dawn, the interior temperature had fallen dangerously low. My water lines were beginning to freeze. The batteries were nearly dead. The heater remained offline. Waiting for road crews no longer seemed smart. Staying might kill me. I decided to leave. Visibility was terrible. The storm still raged. But movement offered a chance. Remaining stationary felt like surrender. I packed essentials. Started the engine. The diesel coughed reluctantly. Then caught. The sound felt miraculous. I didn't waste time. I pulled from the campsite and headed toward the campground exit. Snow erased the road almost immediately. White covered everything. Road, ditches, shoulders, signs. The world became one endless blank surface. I crawled forward. 5 miles per hour, sometimes less. Wind pushed the RV sideways. Headlights illuminated only swirling white chaos. The campground disappeared behind me. Then I saw movement in the mirrors. A figure, walking, following. At first I thought it was imagination, snow distortion, exhaustion. But every few minutes I caught another glimpse. Dark shape, same distance, always behind, never closer, never farther. Walking through conditions that barely allowed driving, I accelerated. The figure remained. I slowed, still there. A shadow moving through the storm, patient, persistent, unnatural only because of its endurance, not because it disappeared, not because it teleported, because it simply kept coming. The road wound through dense forest. Visibility dropped further. Twice I nearly slid into snowbanks. Once I actually left the roadway. It took 10 minutes to recover. Every second outside the RV felt lethal. The cold bit through gloves instantly. When I climbed back inside, shaking violently, I looked into the mirror again. The figure stood at the edge of visibility, watching, waiting. Then the whiteout swallowed it. A mile later, the engine warning alarm sounded. My heart sank. Electrical fault, battery system failure, exactly what I needed. The dashboard flickered. Several instruments died. The RV limped forward, barely functioning. Then I heard a sound from behind. A familiar sound, one I hadn't heard for hours. The generator, it had started again, by itself. The roar echoed beneath the floor. Power indicators suddenly came alive. Voltage stabilized, systems recovered. The heater activated. Warm air flooded the cabin. I stared at the control panel in disbelief. The generator was running perfectly, as though it had never malfunctioned, as though someone had simply turned it on. At that exact moment, a shape appeared through the windshield. A road maintenance truck. Orange lights flashing. The first vehicle I had seen in nearly 2 days. Relief hit so hard I almost cried. I flagged them down. The workers helped guide me toward the reopened highway. They asked where I'd spent the storm. I told them. The campground, up the mountain, near the old Forest Service loop. The men exchanged a glance. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, one frowned. That's impossible. What is? That campground's closed. It was snowed in. No. He looked genuinely confused. It's been permanently closed for 3 years. A knot formed in my stomach. What about the trailer? What trailer? The one near the tree line. The workers stared at each other again, then back at me. There isn't a trailer there. Weeks later, I contacted the Forest Service. I wanted answers. Maybe road crews removed it. Maybe the workers were mistaken. Maybe I remembered things wrong. The ranger who returned my call checked records. The campground had indeed been closed for years. No caretaker, no seasonal residents, no authorized camping, nothing. When I described the trailer, he grew quiet, then asked an odd question. Did it have a broken rear window? My throat tightened. Maybe. I couldn't tell. Long pause. One was reported years ago. What happened? We never found who owned it. The ranger sounded uncomfortable. Found where? Near the campground. Another pause. After a winter storm, I waited. Eventually, he continued. It disappeared before recovery crews arrived. The call ended soon afterward. No explanation, no details. Just silence. I still own the RV. I still travel, but I replaced the generator system completely. Every wire, every switch, every component. The technicians found nothing unusual. No automatic start features, no faults capable of activating it remotely. Nothing. Yet sometimes during very cold nights, I wake expecting to hear that engine, expecting to hear it rumble to life beneath the floor. Because one fact still bothers me more than the footprints, more than the banging, more than the figure in the storm. The generator started 4 times during those 2 days. Each time, according to the system logs, it was activated manually. A button was pressed, not electronically, not automatically, physically. Someone had turned it on. And according to those same logs, the switch was located outside the RV, exactly where a person would need to stand in the snow, directly beside the vehicle, waiting in the dark. If you're driving cross-country and see a faded wooden sign for Shady Pines long-term RV resort, keep driving. Even if you're exhausted, even if your gas light is on and your eyes are heavy. I didn't listen. I pulled in for a single night of rest, and now I can't sleep without leaving the overhead lights on, terrified of what might be tracking mud into my home. The highway had become a hypnotic blur of gray asphalt and bleached yellow lines. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight, fueled by gas station coffee and the desperate need to put as many miles between us and our old life as possible. In the passenger seat of the rented Class C motorhome, my 8-year-old brother, Leo, was fast asleep, his cheek pressed against the vibrating window. When the sun began to dip below the horizon, bleeding bruised purples and burnt oranges across the sky, I knew I had to pull over. The sign for Shady Pines RV Resort appeared like a mirage, a weathered wooden board with peeling painted pine trees. It promised full hookups, hot showers, and peace and quiet. I signaled, turning the heavy RV down a long gravel driveway that crunched loudly beneath our tires. As we passed beneath a wrought iron archway, the dense canopy of ancient oak trees swallowed the remaining daylight. Shady Pines was not a transient campground. It was a sprawling community of stationary aluminum beasts, most of them permanently skirted with lattice and surrounded by manicured patches of astroturf. There were garden gnomes, elaborate wind chime displays, and heavy ceramic pots overflowing with geraniums, and it was quiet, unnaturally quiet. I parked near the front office, a log cabin-style building with a glowing open sign. As I cut the engine, Leo stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Are we there, Mark?" "Just for the night, buddy. Stay here, lock the doors. I'm going to get us a spot." The office smelled of stale potpourri and old paper. Behind the counter sat a woman who looked to be in her late 70s. She wore a knitted cardigan despite the lingering summer heat, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. "Evening," I said, offering a tired smile. "Hoping you have a spot for the night. Just me and my little brother." The woman's hand, which had been reaching for a map of the campground, froze. Her pale blue eyes snapped up to mine. The pleasant grandmotherly aura evaporated instantly, replaced by something rigid and distinctly uncomfortable. "Your brother?" she asked, her voice dropping a half octave. "A child?" "He's 8, I said, shifting my weight, suddenly feeling like I was intruding. "Is this an age-restricted community? A 55-plus place? The sign on the highway didn't say." "No," she said quickly, her eyes darting toward the window, looking at my RV. "No, it's not restricted. We don't get many youngsters here. It's mostly long-term residents, retirees. We like our quiet. He's well-behaved. We'll be gone by first light." She hesitated for a long, agonizing moment before pulling a site tag from the drawer. "Site 42. It's near the back. Keep him close to your rig. Don't let him wander." "I won't." "I mean it," she said, leaning over the counter. The intensity in her eyes was startling. "Don't let him wander." I took the tag and hurried back to the RV. As I drove slowly through the winding loops of the campground towards Site 42, I noticed the residents, old men in folding chairs, women watering their potted plants. As the rumble of our engine announced our presence, they stopped what they were doing. They didn't wave. They just watched. And as we passed, I realized they weren't looking at me. Their eyes were locked on the passenger window. They were staring at Leo. Site 42 was a large pull-through spot directly across from a playground. The playground struck me as bizarre. In a community populated entirely by the elderly, the play structure was immaculate. The vibrant red and yellow plastic slides gleamed, the metal swing chains showed no rust, and the sand beneath it was raked perfectly smooth, like a Zen garden. It looked as though it had been built yesterday, yet completely untouched. "Can I go play?" Leo asked, pressing his hands against the glass. "Tomorrow morning before we leave," I promised, too exhausted to supervise him. "Let's just eat and sleep." We ate microwave dinners in silence. The heavy, oppressive quiet of the campground pressed against the thin walls of the RV. There was no hum of highway traffic, no distant dogs barking, just a stifling stillness. At exactly 9 p.m., a sharp crackle of static shattered the silence. It was so loud I dropped my fork. It came from a rusted PA speaker mounted on a telephone pole outside. A voice, scratchy, distorted, and monotone, echoed through the trees. "Attention residents, it is 2100 hours. The perimeter is secured. Please draw your blinds and observe the evening protocols." I frowned, peeking out the window. All across the campground, a synchronized wave of movement occurred. Snap, snap, snap. Curtains were drawn shut, blinds were pulled down, porch lights were flicked off. Within seconds, the entire RV park was plunged into darkness, save for the pale moonlight illuminating the pristine playground. "What was that?" Leo asked, his voice trembling. "Just camp rules, I guess. Old people like their sleep." The next morning, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to have burned off with the dew. The sun was shining, and Leo was bouncing off the walls of the RV. Remembering my promise, I let him go across the gravel road to the playground while I disconnected the water and sewer hoses. "Don't go far! Stay right there!" I called out. Leo ran to the swings, his joyous laughter cutting through the morning air. The reaction was instantaneous. 2 RVs down, an elderly man who had been sipping coffee on his patio abruptly stood up, his chair scraping violently against the concrete. He stared at Leo, his face pale, then hurried inside, slamming his door. Across the loop, a woman pulling weeds dropped her trowel and scurried into her trailer. Within 2 minutes of Leo laughing, every single resident who had been outside had vanished indoors. A cold prickle of unease washed over me. It wasn't annoyance. It was fear. They were acting like Leo was a live grenade. I walked over to the playground to tell him it was time to go. As I approached the sandbox, I froze. The sand had been perfectly raked the night before. I had noticed it under the moonlight. Leo had just run straight to the swings, but circling the base of the bright red slide were footprints. Small, perfectly formed, barefoot prints of a young child. They didn't lead to the slide. They just circled it over and over, pressing deep into the damp morning sand. Leo was wearing sneakers. "Leo, did you take your shoes off?" I asked, my voice tight. "No." Before I could process it, an old man approached. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He stopped at the edge of the playground, refusing to step onto the sand. "You shouldn't let him play there," the old man wheezed, his eyes darting frantically around the empty park. "He's just on the swings," I said defensively. "You don't understand," the man said, leaning forward, his voice a desperate whisper. "They hear it. The laughing. It stirs them up. You need to keep him inside. Keep him tethered. How old is he? That's none of your business." "Is he under 10? The man's eyes were wide, watery, and terrified. "If he's under 10, you need to leave, right now, before nightfall." "We're leaving," I snapped, grabbing Leo's hand. "Come on, Leo." But the engine wouldn't start. I turned the key and the starter clicked agonizingly. Dead battery? Alternator? I spent the next 3 hours under the hood, cursing my luck. The tow truck couldn't come until the following morning. We were stuck for another night. That evening, the paranoia set in. I kept the blinds drawn, refusing to look outside. At 9 p.m., the PA system crackled to life again, repeating the same eerie lockdown message. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep. The air inside the RV was stifling. I quietly unlocked the door and stepped out onto the metal stairs to smoke a cigarette. The night was deathly calm. Not a single leaf rustled. I looked across the gravel path to the playground. The swing was moving. Not a gentle sway from a breeze, but a high, rhythmic arc, back and forth, the rusty chains squealing softly in the darkness, as if a child was pumping their legs, trying to touch the sky. Beside it, the second swing hung perfectly motionless. I dropped my cigarette and backed into the RV, throwing the deadbolt. The next morning, I was determined to find out what was wrong with this place. While Leo watched cartoons on my iPad, I walked to the communal laundry and shower building at the center of the park. It was a cinder block structure that smelled of heavy bleach and damp lint. Inside, an elderly woman was folding towels. She didn't look up as I entered. On the wall was a cork bulletin board covered in faded flyers. Macrame class, 1998. Lost cat, 2004. The edges of the board were peeling. Behind the board, I noticed the distinct yellowed edge of an old newspaper clipping, deliberately tucked away. I waited until the woman picked up her laundry basket and left. As soon as the door clicked shut, I pried the bulletin board away from the cinder block wall. A dozen newspaper clippings cascaded to the floor. I fell to my knees, gathering them up. The dates ranged from 1982 to 1986. 6-year-olds still missing from local RV park. Search called off for Whispering Pines boy. Third child vanishes in 3 years. Police baffled. I read the articles, my heart hammering against my ribs. 3 children, all under the age of 10, had vanished from this very campground in the 1980s. No bodies were ever found. No suspects were ever named. The articles mentioned the playground. They mentioned that the children had simply walked away while playing and were never seen again. Suddenly, the residents' bizarre behavior made a terrifying kind of sense. They weren't a cult. They weren't dangerous. They were deeply, profoundly traumatized. They were a community of ghosts living in a suspended state of grief and paranoia, terrified of the playground, terrified of children, terrified of history repeating itself. But why were the footprints fresh? Why did the swing move? I shoved the clippings into my pocket and sprinted back to the RV. I threw open the door. Leo was sitting at the dinette table, his iPad off, staring out the window toward the playground. "Leo, get your stuff. The tow truck will be here in an hour. We're going to wait by the front office." Leo didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on the red slide. "Leo?" "The boy under the slide says it's his turn," Leo whispered. His voice detached, almost dreamlike. Ice water flooded my veins. "What boy?" "Tommy. He says he's cold. He wants me to come play in his house. It's underneath." I grabbed Leo by the shoulders, shaking him slightly. "Look at me. There is no boy. We are leaving. We are leaving." The tow truck never arrived. I called the company, and they claimed the driver had gotten lost, then got a flat tire, and now couldn't make it until the morning. The dread that settled over me was suffocating. We were trapped for a third night. As the sun began to set, The atmosphere in the campground shifted from passive avoidance to active, militant anxiety. Old men were patrolling the gravel roads. I saw them carrying heavy maglite flashlights and what looked like CB radios. I locked the RV doors. I pulled the blinds tight. I gave Leo an old Game Boy and told him to sit on the bed and not move. At 9 p.m., the PA system crackled, but this time, it wasn't the monotone recording. It was the screeching wail of an air raid siren. The piercing sound tore through the quiet night, rising and falling in an apocalyptic rhythm. Then a live voice came over the speaker, frantic and breathless. Code red. Code red. The child is out. Lock your doors. Search protocol initiated. Keep them away from the dirt. I jumped up, peering through a crack in the blinds. The campground was a chaotic swarm of dancing light. Dozens of elderly residents were marching through the dark, their flashlight beams crisscrossing the manicured lawns and gravel paths. They were moving in a coordinated grid, sweeping the area. Leo, I said, turning around. Leo, stay right. The bed was empty. The Game Boy sat on the mattress, still blinking. The emergency window at the back of the RV, the one above Leo's bed, was unlatched and swung wide open, flapping gently in the night breeze. Leo! I screamed, tearing the door of the RV open and plunging into the night. I lost him, I yelled to the nearest resident, the old man with the cane. My brother is gone. The old man's face contorted in absolute horror. The playground! Check the playground! Don't let him go under! I ran blindly toward the center of the park. The siren was still wailing, deafening and disorienting. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the terrifying faces of the residents, who looked less like searchers and more like soldiers fighting a war they had lost decades ago. I reached the playground. The sand was undisturbed save for a heavy set of rusted metal storm doors set into the earth right behind the red slide. They looked like cellar doors, the kind you'd see in tornado country. They were thrown wide open, plunging down into pitch-black darkness. Leo! I screamed into the void. A faint, echoing giggle drifted up from the dark. It wasn't Leo's laugh. I didn't think. I scrambled down the concrete steps, the air instantly turning frigid. The smell of mildew and rotting earth filled my lungs. At the bottom of the stairs, I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, flicking on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a massive underground storm shelter. But it wasn't empty. It was a shrine. The concrete walls were lined with rotting toys from the 1980s, faded Transformers, moldy Cabbage Patch Kids, rusted tricycles, and dozens of pairs of tiny, decaying shoes. In the center of the room, sitting cross-legged on the cold dirt floor, was Leo. He was holding hands with nothing, just grasping the empty air, staring vacantly into the dark. Leo, I sobbed, rushing forward and grabbing him, hoisting him into my arms. He felt freezing cold, like a block of ice. He doesn't want us to leave, Mark, Leo murmured, his eyes rolling back slightly. Tommy says it's lonely in the dirt. We're leaving, I growled, backing toward the stairs. As I turned, the beam of my phone swept across the back wall of the shelter. For a fraction of a second, I saw them, shadows pressed against the concrete. Small, child-sized silhouettes seemingly burned into the stone, vibrating with a frantic, silent energy. I didn't look back. I carried Leo up the stairs, my legs burning, bursting out into the chaotic night. The elderly residents had formed a perimeter around the playground, their flashlights pointed at the storm doors. As I emerged with Leo safe in my arms, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Some of the women began to weep. The old man with the cane slumped to his knees in relief. They didn't try to stop me. They just parted, making a path for me to run back to the RV. I didn't wait for the tow truck. I threw Leo into the passenger seat, popped the hood of the RV, and bypassed the faulty starter solenoid with a screwdriver, a trick our dad had taught me years ago. Sparks flew, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the hood shut. I threw the RV into drive, not bothering to disconnect the hoses. The water line snapped with a violent hiss. The sewer hose tore away, but I didn't care. I floored the gas pedal, the heavy vehicle fishtailing on the gravel as we tore out of shady pines, busting right through the flimsy wooden gate at the entrance. We drove through the night, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky, and we were 2 states away. Leo slept the whole time. When he woke up, he was himself again. He asked for McDonald's and complained about the heat. He didn't remember the playground. He didn't remember the storm shelter. He didn't remember Tommy. A week later, we finally settled into a small apartment in Seattle. The RV was parked in the driveway, waiting to be returned to the rental company. I went inside the rig one last time to make sure we hadn't left anything behind. I was sweeping the linoleum floor, feeling a profound sense of relief, when I froze. Starting from the front door of the RV, tracking perfectly down the narrow hallway, were footprints. They were small, perfectly formed, and made of damp, black earth. They didn't lead toward the door. They led away from it. I followed them, my breath hitching in my throat. The little muddy footprints marched down the hall and stopped right beside the lower bunk bed. The bed where Leo sleeps.